Hi, Paul. Welcome to this
Hello.
forum. Yes.
Hi,
Hey,
Paul, and
thank-
welcome to the forum too.
Yeah, Paul and Paul, Paul to Paul. Okay.
Yeah.
People are going to get a bit confused. But anyway, let's get going. Thanks so much, Paul, for being part of this event where we have assembled a group of experts to help the workforce out there. And by workforce, we mean those who are currently employed, self-employed, or even those who have been forced to be out of the workforce due to whatever circumstances. And we also have, Paul, a bunch of quite a big bunch of students who will be joining the workforce in a very short time. So we have quite a few things on our plate today. So our theme is actually to revive, to realign, and to rebuild the Malaysian labor market amidst all the doom and gloom. Today, we don't want to talk about bad news. I think you just put on your WhatsApp, you get plenty of that every day. So I think we are in agreement. We are moving away from that, right, Paul?
100%.
Yes. So today we are, for the people out there, really Paul is going to address surviving the storm and beyond. So Paul is a clinical psychologist. So Paul, let's start with there's the first one for you, and you take it whichever way you want. What mental health aspects are crucial to surviving this onslaught, and what perspective should we adopt? Paul, over to you, Paul.
Okay. For a long time, Paul, and all of you, for a long time, psychology has only been very psychopathological, meaning we deal with illnesses and problems and things like that. And it's only recently, relatively recently, that psychology has taken a more preventive stance, people capabilities, people's strengths, building on them to actually prevent illnesses, disorders, dysfunction even from happening and becoming pathological. So what I'd like to introduce all of you to is this concept of various factors that we can actually tune in, fine-tune, change, that will put us on a platform or put us in a position where we can actually try and prevent ourselves from getting into these distressing situations that very often become very serious and they need professional intervention. So I'd like to start off with some very simple models. I'm going to put the individual in context for you, and then break down this individual into components that interact, which you and I can own, and we can actually make a difference with. So moving on, Paul.
Yeah, Paul,
that's me.
Sorry,
yes, Paul.
Just because, as you mentioned, the stance has shifted. So for the benefits of the audience out there, do you have any slides to share with us? Because it might be new to some people, this whole preventive aspect of psychology.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yes. Okay. Oh, that's
more
you again.
Certainly. I've got a couple of slides that I'm going to address because you need to. I would like it to be as multi-sensorial as possible. I mean, if we're all in a classroom having a workshop together, that'd be fantastic. But let's do a visual, audiovisual. I've got some slides that I'll talk to, and here they are. So this is me, the mumbo jumbo bit. People call me doctor, professor, and all that, dato even, but I'm actually, don't call me all of that. I'm actually a tun, Paul. If you spell it backwards, Okay, that's the little bit, that's the humor bit. Now, moving on, seriously. Now, I'd like to put the individual in context. For those of you who like evidence-based research and references, this is a model by Bronfenbrenner. It's a very nice model. It looks confusing, but if you see in the middle, right in the center, we look at the individual. Now, the saying goes, no man is an island, and we don't live on an island alone either. Now, the individual lives in various systems, okay? So the individual has their own little constitution, their own factors that determine the personality and the psychology. They live in another system, the home, the immediate family, the micro system. And then, of course, this system exists within a larger system, the larger context of the home, extended family, your work environment, and it goes on and on and on. It goes into various systems. Now, look at the red arrows. These systems always interact. Now, you see, I'm putting the individual in a context here, Paul. So never forget that. Whoever you deal with, whether it's a little baby or whether it's an adult or whether it's a client of Perkeso or whether it's a patient, anyone lives within this kinds of systems. So always remember that, my friends. People live within systems. Don't take them away. You take them away and you lose the contextual factor, you lose the cultural relevance of people, and at the spiritual level, you lose everything. The individual is in a context, and you must always bear that in mind. So this is the system in its wholesome, the whole perspective, okay? Now let's look at the individual. This is a model. It's an amazing model, isn't it, Paul? All you see are arrows. Paul, what do you see here, Paul? What do you see, Paul?
I see a string of arrows. I'm just wondering why the interactions are coming from.
Ah, great. That's super observation, Paul. These are interactional arrows. Can you see? They're bidirectional. So on either end of each of these arrows, they are entities or factors that interact with one another. Now, let me give you a simple example. It's a very famous model. It's it might be running into the danger of being oversimplified or reductionistic, but this is a great model for every layperson to start with. Even professionals can start working with this. Now, very often we have all kinds of stimuli in our lives, in all systems, the individual, the microsystem, the macro system, and all of that. Now, the stimuli could be the weather, it could be the political climate, it could be a traffic jam, it could be a demanding boss, it could be exams, it could be anything, Paul. So very often there's a stimulus. Now, the stimulus often is attributed to something external. But don't ever forget that sometimes we have internal stimuli like memories of a loss of a loved one, loss of a handphone, or memories of an accident or trauma, But generally, let's look at stimuli per se. Now, the old model is when you have a stimulus of any nature, your mind starts working through it. You see a traffic jam. Oh my goodness, traffic jam. What do I do about this? But you don't consciously spend time thinking about it, although you do process it. Traffic jam. Damn, I'm going to be late for work. Oh, heck, I'm going to miss my date. Or I can't meet the deadline for my work. And you respond. Either you respond with blaring the horn, or you respond by shouting out something, or you respond by meeting the deadline. But there is a behavioral response to stimuli. Now, those days, Paul, it was stimulus, reaction. People always thought of that chain of events. But we must never take away our cognitive processes, how we think, how we process the information, how our religious values come into it, how our belief systems come into it, how we perceive things. Like you might give me white, Paul, and I might say, no, it's black. And that will determine my behavior purely depending on my perception. Now, two other important things that the individual has, two other important factors. One is your body, how your body functions, your hormonal levels, whether you're on drugs, whether you're on marijuana, whether you're on alcohol, whether you're on medication, whether you've got cancer, whether you're tired, not enough sleep, so your body will also determine how you behave. Your body will also determine how your mind is working, depending on the synapses and your medical condition. Now, can you see, Paul, why these arrows are now important? They're all affecting one another. Now, central to all of this, Paul, is something called emotions. Now, Paul, if I see you and you say, Paul, you lucky idiot. Now, you just call me idiot. But I'm now thinking about it. Oh, I know Paul is an old pal, and he's really happy for me that I won $1 million. Now, you see, my emotions have come in. My body is happy. I've had a good rest. And my behavioral response is, thanks, Paul. I wish you win $1 million. Now, can you see how the systems have worked? They've all worked together and they've produced a response on my part. Now, if I was sick, if I was tired, if I was angry, and you came around and said, Paul, can you give me this document urgently? My thinking will be, what the heck, man? I'm already under so much demand. There's curfew in the country. I don't have enough time to go out. I can't go out. I'm tired. I'm sick. I'm not well. Can you see where my emotions are now? And how do you think I'm going to react? Totally differently. So whatever happens, please remember that this model, at least these 5 factors, are always interacting in every individual. Paul, it's happening to you right now. It's happening to everyone who's listening to this presentation. It's happening to me. And it's dynamic, Paul. It changes instantaneously, very, very quickly. Now, the important aspect of this is these four, 100% these four are yours. Whoever thinks about these four, they are not my four components. They are internal to you. It is your mind processing things, Paul, your choice of behavior, your emotions, and your bodily functions, not mine. So when someone blasts the horn behind me, I react by saying, oh, hi, but you react by blaring the horn back or getting out and becoming a road bully, because it's your four components that are interacting at all times. Now, if you take these four, put them in the pandemic. If you take these four factors, put them in a situation where you've lost your job. If you take these four factors and put them in a happy birthday situation, can you see how it becomes individual? So please remember that these four factors definitely are yours. Now, if you want to appreciate an individual, try and understand how at least these four factors interact at all times. Then you'll
Paul,
be moving, because then you, yes, Paul.
If I may jump in, I'm really,
Sure.
this wraps very well, because we have another presenter in this seminar. He's a young guy. His topic is control your own destiny. Because just because your mother dropped you on your head when you were a year old, your behavior today, don't blame your mother. So I'm relating it to the stimuli and your current behavior, which is very much under your control. I mean, it's a very crude association, but in terms of stimuli, so he is saying in this pandemic or your circumstances, which are out of your control, but your behavior is within your control. So am I making the right association, Paul?
Yes, you're beginning to apply this model. Now, because you were dropped on your head, Paul, you might have frontal lobe damage. Now, the blue factor is your body. Now, if you have frontal lobe damage, you might have difficulty controlling and regulating your emotions. Now, if you are then exposed to a stimulus and you process it in one way and you have difficulty controlling your emotions, then your behavior is going to be determined by your emotions and your body. So if you have diabetes, and there's too much sugar in your blood and your synapses, it's going to affect the way you think, process, remember, your focus and attention goes. So can you see how complicated it gets after this? But and you're right now, control your destiny, definitely. How do you do that? You affect one of the processes of these arrows, Paul. You select which arrow I want to slow down, which box I want to tweak and change. Do I want to learn more behavioral skills, more emotional skills, develop emotional intelligence? So that's how we move on, Paul. Now, moving on.
Okay. Yep.
Now, when I give you this model, just imagine, Paul, if you have, oh, by the way, this is how quickly it works, Paul. Can you see? Bang, 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 bang. Milliseconds, Paul. You have no idea how a stimulus quickly affects your body, the adrenaline rush, the behavioral reaction. And the only thing is, preventing this quick response, we need to slow things down. Now, another important factor, Paul, is if any one of these boxes is negative, if I'm negative in my mood right now, because they're all interactional and transactional, if my emotions are negative, my thoughts, my thinking and thought processes will be negative. My body will be negative. My hormones will be negative. My behavior will be negative. See what happens, Paul? You become a negative responder to any stimulus around you. I have a negative situation at home. I come and meet you at work, Paul, and anything can trigger a negative response. So if I want to make choices and control my own destiny, I have to be aware of these processes and then change what happens. Now, that's me as an individual, but I'm also talking to bosses. I'm talking to husbands, friends, spouses. If you are interacting with people, realize that someone else is having these processes, working through them all the time. Moving on, Paul.
Yep.
Now, I've taken the individual right in the middle of Bronfenbrenner's model. Now, let's look at the next system. If you look at the lifespan, you will notice that all of us were born as little babies, toddlerhood, early childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and finally, death beckons, all of us. That is the human lifespan. Now, don't forget that all of us presently are at different stages of the lifespan, most definitely. And it's crucial for us to remember that. Now, I'm at one stage of the lifespan. Paul, you are at one stage of the lifespan. Your child is at another stage. You're meeting a client in your office who is at another stage of their lifespan, whose children and family are also at another stage of the lifespan. Now, it's important to realize that. Okay, now I'm putting the individual in a context now, lifespan context. Don't forget, your body is also going through a lifespan developmental stages and processes. Your systems are getting older. Of course, they all get better from birth. And then the curve changes. They get older, they start breaking down. So can you see the individual in a lifespan context now? Okay, that's important. We know what's happening to the individual within themselves. Now the individual is in a context. At every stage of your lifespan, you have these factors working in you all the time. All the time. If you're looking at someone who's very, very old, their physiological processes are breaking down. Your muscle and skeletal processes are breaking down. You may have dementia because your brain processes are breaking down. As an adult, your physiological function is so peaking and so prolific in its performance, it's different from a toddler. But the 5 factors are still there. Now, the nice bit, Paul, is this. When you put the individual into the family environment, the primary environment, which is the family context, then you put them into the workplace context. See what happens. That's you, Paul.
Yep.
You're interacting with your colleague. You're interacting and thinking about your child. All these people are in your environment. And you're always interacting with one another. Can you imagine the complexity of this, Paul?
Yep.
The complexity of my 4 factors, at least the 4, could be 5, but my factors interacting with your factors, the permutations and combinations are amazing. My negative mood interacting with your perception of me. And then that, of course, triggers your reactions. So when I talk about, or when anyone refers to an individual, please don't think this is the person in the here and the now. No, no, no. They represent a whole series of events and they represent a context. So it's crucial for all of us to remember that we are individuals with internal processes. We live in a context, a primary environment, and a secondary environment.
Okay.
Now we live in a family. Please remember that all families are different. No 2 families are ever alike. Now, it's important for you to remember when you think and talk about family and family dynamics, that families differ in structure, family differ in life cycles. Families go through stages too. You know, you can have the happily married couple, then you have a little baby. That's a different life cycle in the family. Then my family, now I've got adult children who have left the nest and they're working overseas. You know, that's a different life cycle. I'm going through various illnesses in my life cycle. I've had a couple of heart attacks. And so my life cycle and the family life cycle is different. Families function differently. You start off by saving money. It's a very economic function. Some very affluent families are going through leisure periods and socializing periods. Now, please remember this as well. The person that you're dealing with, the Perkeso client, the child, the student, the family member is at a different life cycle within that family and within themselves. They're going through a lifespan stage, and within themselves, you've got all these factors. Can you see how complex it gets, Paul? Now, the important thing is to be able to recognize the relevance of this, and then you become culturally and interpersonally highly competent. That's when you begin to interact with people on a very competent and effective level.
Okay.
I just threw that in for fun's sake. Now,
Paul,
the individual...
Just to jump in.
Yes, please jump in.
You talk about the different things and the balance will shift even while you're in that particular stage, because we were having an after dinner conversation the other day at home, and
right.
My wife had just stumbled upon an article on the internet about this, the most decorated Olympian ever, Michael Phelps. After he had won all his gold medals and after he retired as a swimmer, he went into a state of depression. Because how would you explain that in this context?
Well, if you want to look at just the 5 factors, the depression is just a symptom. The depression is, let me just go back to the slides. Okay. Just
Yep,
very
yes.
quickly, go back to the slides. Oops, there's a, here we go. This is the advantage of high-tech stuff, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, here. Now,
Okay.
when you talk about depression, you're looking at his emotional reactions.
Yes.
They are a symptom. Now, being a clinical psychologist, or even if a psychiatrist is involved, they'll be looking at this depression. Depression will have its own biology behind it. Depression also causes behavior. Depression is also affects or is affected by the way you process the world, process information, process the reality around you. And for whatever reason, Michael Phelps is reacting to some kind of stimulus. He's processing some sensed information. His senses are giving him some information externally or internally in terms of memory. Now, how do we deal with this depression? You've got to start identifying and regulating all other factors first. The most important thing in depression is regulating your physiological reactions. There could be hormonal disruptions, hormonal imbalances, and that's why people consider medication to give you that metabolic or biochemical stability, after which your cognitive and information processing systems are far more effective and functional. We cannot take away the traffic jam. We cannot take away the fact that maybe Phelps cannot be productive any longer outside his arena of athletic performance. But we can change the way you think. We can give you new skills. We can give you emotional awareness and get you fitter as well. So this is one stencil by which you can actually deal with these problems.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome. Moving on again. No worries. It's good to go through the slides back and forth because it's like a revision. Now, another system. This is very pertinent to you. The individual at work. Now, the individual in context as a person, the individual within the primary environment, the individual within the family. Now, the individual is also going to work. Now, the individual is not just working. Some individuals, like you say, students, are going to a university or a learning institution where they're having to perform and barrage with a whole bunch of stimulus and information they need to process. Now, the individual at work has got to deal with government policies, not directly, but the organization is subject to that. The individual at work has to deal with organizational factors. That's the organizational comes up with rules, do's and don'ts. They have to deal with their environment, too cold, too hot, noisy, the whole occupational safety and health issues. But there are other factors involved, the occupational factors and resources available to the individual, like job descriptions, the nature of the work. We also have personal factors, all these that are imported by the individual, those 4 factors that come in. Now, all of this, you, Paul, are a complete person coming to work. You're bringing your family factors in. You're bringing your health into work. You're bringing this whole issue of the human being into your work environment. Now, if we have problems and if you want to optimize performance, if you want to prevent dysfunction, distress, and illnesses, which is a very important thing, if you want to develop resilience, if you want to do all these things and, of course, treat and intervene where there are problems, these factors need psychological evaluation, assessment. They need intervention. They need prevention. They need performance-related kinds of intervention as well. So, Paul, what I'm trying to get at here is, in a work situation, there are things we can control and things we cannot control. Government, no, unless you are one of those guys who want to take up the sword and say, I'm going into battle and change policies. Yeah, by all means, if you're in that situation, go for it. Organization, not many people are in a position where they want to deal with the organizational and top-down policies. The work environment, you can't change it unless you change your job. But what you can change and what employers can do, what people themselves can do for themselves, is to look at occupational factors, examine their resources, and look at their own personal factors, like we suggested some just now, and examine their resources. Let me give you an example. Look at these core factors that I often look at when people come to me with stress and dysfunction related to an occupational setting. The OSI actually is something called the Occupational Stress Inventory. Now, stress Paul, is not a bad thing. Huh? Stress is a
Yep.
good and normal everyday occurrence. The problem happens only when stress becomes dysfunctional and causes distress. Stress is a normal, neutral word. You're stressed because we have a deadline to meet. That's not bad stress. That's good stress. You're stressed because you're hungry. Your body is actually going through physiological stress. And it triggers you to go and hunt for food, get food, and eat. So our body and our life is always stress, working out the stress, meeting the demands, coping with the demands. That's life. And we just hit a balance. But this is one very good psychological tool. For example, it looks at your occupational roles. This moment in time, Paul, is particularly relevant because roles have lost their boundaries. You're at home, your time boundaries have gone, roles have become ambiguous. There's insufficiency of support. You have overload. Now, the environment has changed. Point two, responsibilities have gone up and down and wide and all over the place. There is personal strain, there's occupational strain, there is a vocational strain. Your calling has been questioned. Your motives and values for doing this job has come into question too. Then we're looking at the person, psychological aspects. We're looking at what resources you have. What resources does the individual have? What do you have? Now that you are at work and all our audience is at work, what resources do you have? You identified these resources? Are they viable? Are they alive? Are they dormant? Do they exist even now? How important your recreation is something that you have to consider. Self-care, or that's something that's taken for granted too much, Paul. Self-care. Your social support, another very underrated issue in personal psychological well-being. And how you cope, your coping and thinking strategies. Other aspects that need to be addressed are quality of life and various dimensions of personal well-being. Now, for people to understand this, you need to see a mental health professional who has the tools. It's not like looking up a magazine or doing some hocus pocus stuff on the computer. Be very careful, all of you, when you do an analysis on the computer, a kind of a survey that kind of gives you some form of feedback about yourself, by all means, go for it. But not all of them are psychologically valid or reliable tools. And there are things between the lines that need interpretation. So do it, go and chat about it, discuss it with a professional. And we have our own tools that actually are pertinent to specific issues. Do remember this, huh? If you have a problem, you're just not going to go into a doctor's clinic and say, X-ray my whole body, please. Give me an analysis of the whole body. No one ever does that. We identify the problem, we do analysis and check out what the areas of the problem and focus in on how and what causes your distress, dysfunction, and things like that. So, don't be too global in your thinking. Try and be a little bit more pertinent and focused in things that cause you distress and dysfunction. This
Paul,
is my
if I
last
may-
slide, Paul. Yeah, sure.
Paul, I had some questions earlier, but I think I'll throw this in now. Go up one slide.
There we go.
Up one, Paul.
Another one. Yes, here we
Yeah.
are.
It's based on this, and even don't have to move, but because you talked about now the lines are blurred. You work
Yeah.
from home, the work environment has come home. The school environment is also in the children, you put them out, you put them in the school bus, or you send them in the car, and then they've gone off. So last time the segregation was very obvious at 7:40 a.m. or 7:50,
Yeah.
whatever time. So now it's all blurred. And because of that, the father, mother, the work used to be working mother or the housewife. Now it's the weekend housewife, the weekday working mom is now all rolled into one. For all this, mother,
Yeah.
father, children, college students, secondary school kids, preschoolers, what is this whole, how has the pandemic hit based on experience on some practical things? Is it the pandemic really blow things out because of this? Because all these roles have been blurred into one in that same, it used to be 9 to 5. I don't worry about my kids. Now they are right next to me asking for a bottle of water when I'm in the middle of a conference call. So who in your the worst hit, Paul? I know it's difficult to categorize, but who is the worst hit, you think?
Well, like we mentioned earlier, appreciate each family member, appreciate at what stage of their lifespan they are, because that'll give you an idea as to their cognitive, their information processing, their thinking styles. Your 2-year-old child is functioning differently, perceiving things differently. Your teenage child who's going through a very crucial period of self-definition, understanding, processing, developing an identity. Your grandma or grandpa who lives with you become even more preoccupied about maybe death, dying, illness. Everyone is going through a developmental phase. Now you're all living together. All the 4 factors are intermingling. It's like everyone thrown into a blender. Now, who is affected most? Cannot tell, Paul. I can tell you one thing. Everybody is affected differently. And just like in any organization, how I would tackle it, and that's how I've helped some families, is to have a family session, and within that family session to prioritize your own difficulties. So Paul, you and I and one family, for example, what are you going through, Paul, at the moment? Paul, I need Paul J, I need some time aside. I want some downtime. Just leave me. Don't do anything. Don't disturb me. I need to buy food every day. That kind of list of priorities. Now, what are your priorities? What's your wife's priorities? What's your child's priorities? Everyone is equally important. The only difference is we're at a different life stage of our lifespan. Now, within those priorities, it is crucial for you to start addressing everybody's priorities. No one is more important than the other, because at that particular life stage and lifespan, it is crucial for them subjectively. So let's address priority-wise. Let's all try and address this one first, but everyone gets it addressed. Now, I have a slight twist on this one, okay. Paul. Interesting take.
Yep.
Who is affected most? I would say that a child during the pandemic, adjusting would be very, very easy because they don't know better.
Yep.
They can't remember something worse than this or better than this. So then you have a slightly older child. If you go through the lifespan, you come to someone who's quite old in their 70s and 80s. They remember World War II. They lived through disaster. If you look at someone else in another country, they've lived through the atomic bomb. They've lived through tsunamis. They've lived through very hard times. So they're affected differently. Now, if you and I think of only good times in the past, because that's all we've had, this period in time is disastrous, Paul. So coping, a lot of it will depend on your memories and your skills that you've learned from the past. Now, that's something that partly defines resilience. What I know from the past and how it becomes relevant now. If you've just lost a handphone for the first time in your life, it's going to be disastrous. But if you've lost 1 or 2 in the past, it's still going to be disastrous, but you know exactly how you can cope with it. What I have to do, get a new card, make a report, and all that kind of stuff. So your memories and past experience will affect how you cope with the present pandemic. To answer your question, Paul, who's affected most in the household during this period? Everyone is. Subjectively, I'm suffering the worst, but everyone is suffering differently, Paul.
Yeah. Paul, I want to add on to that question. Just
yes.
What you have suggested, the families need to talk, but in the Malaysian context, because while this is an international audience, in the Malaysian context, is it a commonplace thing for Malaysian families to be able to say, hey guys, let's have this 5-minute family discussion and do this? Is it a common thing? I think for those who have read some things or listened to this, and there used to be a lot of pop psychology books that say you need family time, sit down and say, I want mom time, dad time, student time, whatever. What's the reality in Malaysia? We hope that through this session, people who listen and if they haven't done it, they'll say, let's have a 5-minute discussion. And if there's any takeaway, I hope people do this after this session. But from your analysis and experience, Paul, is this done enough in the Malaysian families?
That's a very culturally appropriate question, Paul. When you and I talk to each other, it's like complimenting each other all the time. Good question, Paul. Thank you very much. Anyway, very good. It's called a culturally competent question. You are addressing the cultural background, the realities of other people, and developing this issue of communication and effectiveness between people. Thank you for that, Paul. You're right. In some cultures and in some countries, they are not at the level of, or not open enough of, or don't know the skill of being able to sit down and talk about things openly. However, given that kind of family, I would presume there would be some kind of head in the absence of that kind of open, so-called democratic kind of discussion. If the head themselves is able to identify the need to prioritize, they may be doing so individually. I'm not taking away the functionality or the effectiveness of families that do not sit and talk together. Many families who don't have this kind of reality or this kind of exercise or this practice are doing quite well, doing very, very well, some of them. So please, this is not about one size fitting all. It's important to be able to identify your family culture, your family processes, the family dynamics, and all the subsystems within the family, and make things work. Now, the important thing is the end result, what the end result is. Whatever you decide, whatever transpires within the family process, if the end result is still distress or dysfunction, that needs to be addressed. And if a professional is involved, they would go back to the earlier processes and start tweaking things. Now, sometimes, Paul, the reality is we can't change what's so deep-rooted and solidified after so many years. What we can do is start changing things from now. And that's our hope for change, Paul.
Yep. Let's move on to your last slide, Paul. We are running out of time.
Here we go. The last slide is a reminder. Consider the individual at all times. Please be sensitive as to what constitutes the individual and what transactions are happening within. Put the individual and remember, identify the individual's context, the systems in which the individual lives, exists, and works. Always maintain as holistic a view as possible. Please distinguish between policy that sometimes is dormant and paralyzed almost sometimes. I say that very carefully, as opposed to applied formula, applied systems, applied issues. So remember, if you want to plan an intervention, plan a prevention program, make sure it's applied. It's not just vocabulary that stays on a piece of paper. And cross-sectional analysis of a person or a situation is important. The snapshot of what's happening now, but also, please, we need to look at people throughout the lifespan, a very longitudinal perspective of where people have been, where they are, and where they're headed to. So I leave you with that, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Paul. Hey, thanks for your screens, Paul. Paul, if you can stop sharing, I can see a bigger picture of you.
Okay, here we go. I've stopped sharing. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Paul, it has been so engaging. I think I had some questions planned, and some, when they heard that you were coming on stream, they sent, but I think we have gelled them in. So
I believe so. Nice.
Yeah, and I think what's important is, Paul, I read psychology for not as a major, but as a minor at university, and the conditioning, the stimulus, Pavlov and Skinner.
Oh, yes.
And then I applied it to the pets we had at home. We always had a dog, and it was interesting.
Yeah.
But in the context that you have shared in terms of the stimuli and our behavior, I think there's been a lot of takeaways for us. And I think we can go on. We could go on for another hour if we had the time. But unfortunately,
easily. Paul, it's so important that you've facilitated a session like this, because what's really necessary is for people to be learning these kind of skills. In addition to everything else, we need to change our curriculum, Paul. We need to change our developmental curriculum, our family and domestic curriculum, and of course the school curriculum. But it's up to us, up to you, me, our individual families to say, we want to learn a bit more applied psychology. That's missing from the curriculum. But thank you so much for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think what's important, our key takeaways for everybody out there, even if there's one slide one statement that matters to you, apply it today, as Paul said, the principle of applied psychology, applied knowledge. That's what's going to make the difference. We did not put up this topic for an academic discourse on what's happening in the pandemic. We are faced with realities. People have lost jobs, have had pay cuts. People have suffered deaths and illness in a family. COVID-19 is a tragedy that a lot of us have never seen before. And I've never lived through the wars, thank goodness, but I heard it was a terrible thing. And the worst stories I heard was grandparents taking the small pickaxe and trying to look for sweet potatoes in the ground. And then now, so
my mom and dad did that.
Yeah. And we have a different dynamic here. And today it's shifting. And you know, you could be so stable. I'm thinking out of the audience out there, yesterday was fine. And what if today somebody in the family or extended family comes down with COVID-19, the whole balance shifts. So I think we are faced with a disaster. And I thank you, Paul, on behalf of Perkeso. I thank you for giving us things that hopefully can make life a bit better. So thank you, Paul. We'd like to wrap this up. Thank you very much on behalf of Perkeso and the group out there.
You're most welcome. Always remember, ask and reach out. Don't ever stop doing that. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.